Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutade Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Nitinamine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Prachadine Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Paschatya Desatadine Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasati Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Looks like we'll be able to complete this chapter. There's 2 chapters in Srimad Bhagavatam discussing the life of Lord Ramacandra, or the pastimes of Lord Ramacandra. And we got as far as Ramchandra returning to Ayodhya. I'm so used to hearing of the versions of Ramayana, hearing Valmiki Ramayana. There are some passages here that are not the same as the Valmiki Ramayana, and I'm have the audacity to say it wasn't like that, it was like this. But Shukadeva Goswami certainly knows Ram's pastimes. But there's variety. So when you hear, maybe you didn't grow up hearing Valmiki Ramayana, maybe you heard Ramcharitamanas or something. So how it works is Shukadeva Goswami is narrating, as he says at the beginning of the chapter, from the authorized versions, plural. And it depends what part of India you grew up in, or what version of Ramayana that you're accustomed to hearing from. I was at somebody's home one time, and I was narrating something from the Srimad Bhagavatam, and the 10-year-old boy said no. And I said it again, and he said no. I said it again, he said no. So why are you saying no? He said, that's the version on TV. And you become accustomed to something, and it's like this. One of the reasons why it's very important for the teachings that are given by Prahlad Maharaj, Komara Acharet Pragyo Dharman Bhagavataniha, from Komara age, the beginning of school age, training in disciplic succession, so important, because you get something else, and then it's something else. Prabhupada explained he found one of the most difficult challenges in presenting Krishna consciousness was the blind faith that people have in science. And if you can demonstrate according to science, then they can accept. And if it doesn't conform with what they've already heard from science, then it's hard to accept. And what people have heard largely from science is atheism, or from science. If you can see it with your senses, okay. And if you can't see it with your senses, there's no proof, so you can't accept it. Now, a real scientist is knows their boundaries. They don't cross their boundaries, but most scientists don't know their boundaries. A little story. A few years ago, I was in high school. And in my senior year in high school, my family was part of a foreign exchange student program called AFS, American Field Service. Is there something like that here in Houston? No. But when I was growing up, that was the thing. So somebody from our school went to some foreign country, and some from foreign country came to our school. And my mother and father were the host of a young man who was in his senior year doing his studies in America. So he came to our school and stayed in our home. And he was from Japan, from Tokyo. And his name was Ken Ijiri. And he was brilliant. And after we graduated, we didn't keep contact. And some years later, he was visiting in New York because he had just finished his third PhD. His first PhD was in math. His second PhD was in chemistry. And his third PhD was in physics. And he had just finished his third PhD at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. And his project, I asked him, what was it? So he had finished and he wanted to come to New York. He hadn't seen the Statue of Liberty. And I said, I hadn't either, so let's go. Although I lived there. So we're riding in a subway going to Statue of Liberty, Battery Park, all the way down the south end of Manhattan. And I said, what's your PhD in? This one, the third, he said 3. And it was studying from those 3 disciplines, the cell division of a frog and how it happens. And so I said, just supposing, I'm not positing this, just supposing that what enabled the 2 frog cells to divide was the presence of a soul. And because of the presence of the soul, it could divide from 1 cell into 2 cells. And otherwise it wouldn't. Supposing that was the answer. What would you as a scientist say? And he gave a very honest answer. He said, as a scientist, we can't speak about that because it's not measurable. It's not something the scientists can even take a look at or comment on, yes or no. And I didn't, I was thinking that's honest, but most scientists would say no. Just because of the assumptions. Just this morning, I was hearing Prabhupada speaking in Dallas, Texas, 1975. He was visiting Dallas, Texas. And he happened to choose the Komara Acharya Pragyo verse from the Bhagavatam. That's the Prahlad speaking to his classmates, the first verse, that spiritual education starts at the tender age of childhood. So that was the verse. And then he spoke about it in general terms. And then he spoke about it that here in Dallas, we have a Gurukul, it's to fulfill this purpose. And then he went on to say that if one doesn't hear from childhood, one's going to hear something else, and science is atheism. And so one becomes fixed in atheism, and it becomes difficult. And he just said it very, very clearly. Same thing I said at the beginning. When we become accustomed to hearing something again and again and again and again, that's your menu. You can't think otherwise, or it's hard to think otherwise. So Shukadeva Goswami is an authority that we have trust in. Vyasadeva is the compiler of Srimad Bhagavatam, and Vyasadeva is the speaker of the Bhagavatam. We have our implicit trust, our acharyas. So whatever is here It's authoritative. We may have heard something else. That's okay. This is the final word. And the final, even within the final word, he's saying there's multiple versions that are authorized. The detail that we ran into yesterday was, it just says that Ram came directly back and met with Bharat. And Valmiki Ramayana speaks otherwise. Valmiki Ramayana says he camped at some distance, sent Hanuman. Hanuman did some testing the waters to see if Bharata is attached, fine, let him remain the king. There's some really beautiful painting that I have in my collection of beautiful paintings. And it shows Bharata sitting in a cave. And Hanuman is at his feet with folded palms. And Bharata has the shoes on a throne, although the throne that he had the shoes on were in Ayodhya itself, and he was living outside, but that was what the picture showed. And he was living a mendicant's life, although he was ruling the kingdom for 14 years. But it was Hanuman that went to see, is he attached? Does he want to continue? If so, so be it. So that's the feature that I am accustomed to. When I read this one, I made a comment yesterday, and it wasn't very respectful to Shukadeva Goswami, but like it wasn't like that. Hanuman went. But so if there's different versions, we've been saying this every evening, if there are different versions, here's the very simple way that our acharyas have said, that Padma Purana says, it's just different days of Brahma. And during different days of Brahma, there are different details in the flow of Ram's pastimes. Details may vary. The theme or the rasa is essentially the same. The taste, the spiritual taste of the participants is essentially the same. So here we are. Ram is meeting with Bharata. Bharata is jubilant. After offering the wooden shoes before Lord Ramacandra, Lord Bharata stood with folded hands, his eyes full of tears, and Lord Ramacandra bathed Bharata with tears while embracing him with both arms for a long time. Accompanied by Mother Sita and Lakshmana, Lord Ramacandra then offered his respectful obeisances unto the learned Brahmanas and the elderly persons in the family, and all the citizens of Ayodhya offered their respectful obeisances unto the Lord. The citizens of Ayodhya, upon seeing their king return after a long absence, offered him flower garlands, waved their upper cloths, and danced in jubilation. O king, Lord Bharata carried Lord Ramachandra's wooden shoes. Sugriva and Vibhishan carried a whisk and an excellent fan. Hanuman carried a white umbrella. Shatrughna carried a bow and 2 quivers, and Sita Devi carried a water pot filled with water from holy places. Angada carried a sword, and Jambavan, king of the rickshaws, carried a golden shield. O King Parikshit, as the Lord sat on his airplane of flowers with women offering him prayers and reciters chanting about his characteristics, he appeared like the moon with the stars and planets. Thereafter, having been welcomed by his brother Bharata, Lord Ramacandra entered the city of Ayodhya in the midst of a festival. When he entered the palace, he offered obeisances to all the mothers, including Kaikeyi and the other wives of Maharaj Dasharath, and especially his own mother, Kaushalya. He also offered obeisances to his spiritual preceptors, such as Vishishta. Friends of his own age and younger friends worshipped him, and he returned their respectful obeisances, as did Lakshmana and Mother Sita. In this way, they all entered the palace. Upon seeing their sons, the mothers of Ram, Lakshman, Bharata, and Shatrughna immediately arose, like unconscious bodies returning to consciousness. The mothers placed their sons on their laps and bathed them with tears, thus relieving themselves of the grief of long separation. The family priest, or spiritual master Vashishta, had Lord Ramacandra cleanly shaved, freed him from his matted locks of hair. Then, with the cooperation of the elderly members of the family, he performed the bathing ceremony, Abhishek, for Lord Ramacandra with the water of the four seas and with other substances, just as it was performed for King Indra. Lord Ramacandra, fully bathed and his head clean shaven, dressed himself very nicely and was decorated with a garland and ornaments. Thus he shone brightly, surrounded by his brothers and wife, who were similarly dressed and ornamented. Be pleased by the full surrender and submission of Lord Bharata, Ramacandra then accepted the throne of the state. He cared for the citizens exactly like a father, and the citizens, being fully engaged in their occupational duties of Varna and Ashrama, accepted him as their father. And there is a purport, a long one. People are very fond of the pattern of Rama Raja. And even today, politicians sometimes form a party called Rama Raja, but unfortunately have no obedience to Lord Ram. It is sometimes said that people want the kingdom of God without God. Such an aspiration, however, is never to be fulfilled. Good government can exist when the relationship between the citizens and the government is like that exemplified by Lord Ramacandra and his citizens. Lord Ramacandra ruled his kingdom exactly as a father takes care of his children, and the citizens, being obliged to the good government of Lord Ramacandra, accepted the Lord as their father. Thus, the relationship between the citizens and the government should be exactly like that between father and son. When the sons in a family are well trained, they are obedient to the father and mother. And when the father is well qualified, he takes good care of the children, as indicated here by the word swa dharma nirata varnashrama gunan vita. The people were good citizens because they accepted the institution of Varna and Ashram, which arranges society in the Varnashram divisions of Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra, and the Ashram divisions of Brahmachari, Grihastha, Vanaprastha, Sannyas. This is actual human civilization. People must be trained according to the different Varnashram occupational duties, as confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 4.13. Chatur Varnyam Maya Shrishtam Guna Karma Vibhagashaha. The four Varnas must be established according to varying qualities and work. The first principle for good government is that it must institute this Varnashram system. The purpose of Varnashrama is to enable people to become God conscious. Varnashrama charabhata purushena parakpuman Vishnur aradyate. The entire Varnashram system is intended to establish people, to enable people to become Vaishnavas. Vishnur Asya Devata. When people worship Vishnu as the Supreme Lord, they become Vaishnavas. Thus, people should be trained to become Vaishnavas through the system of Varna and Ashram, as they were during the reign of Lord Ramacandra, when everyone was fully trained to follow the Varnashram principles. Paragraph. Simply enforcing laws and ordinances cannot make the citizens obedient and lawful. That is impossible. Throughout the entire world, there's so many states, legislative assemblies, and parliaments, but still the citizens are rogues and thieves. Good citizenship, therefore, cannot be enforced. The citizens must be trained. As there are schools and colleges to train students to become chemical engineers, lawyers, or specialists in many other departments of knowledge, there must be schools and colleges to train students to become brahmanas, kshatriyas, vaishyas, shudras, brahmacharis, grahastas, vanaprasthas, and sannyasis. This will provide the preliminary condition for good citizenship. Varnashrama gunan vita. That's from this verse. Generally speaking, if the king or president is a rajarshi, the relationship between the citizens and the chief executive will be clear, and there'll be no possibility of disruption in the state because the number of thieves and rogues will decrease. In Kali Yuga, however, because the Varnashram system is neglected, people are generally thieves and rogues. In the system of democracy, such thieves and rogues naturally collect money from other thieves and rogues. And thus, there's chaos in every government, and no one is happy. Here, the example of good government is to be found in the reign of Lord Ramacandra. If people follow this example, there will be good government all over the world. Easier said than done. Some of you may know when Prabhupada was in India, in his very ill condition, various things happened, and one of the main instruments to make it happen was Tamal Krishna Maharaj. He knew Prabhupada, felt energy by preaching, and Prabhupada was allowing himself to just depart from this world. And Tamal Krishna Maharaj said something like, you know, you're like Arjuna, you'll die on the battlefield. And Prabhupada said, yes. So he said, let's go to the West. Yes. So a plan was made, tickets were made and visas and everything. And there were three main purposes that the Prabhupada had explicitly said. One was to give his association to the devotees. And a second reason was to visit Gita Nagari. The name was given to that farm by Prabhupada to show how to establish Varnashram in this world, because he was saying that half of my mission is fulfilled, the other half remains. And that's a lot, half. And the half that remains is establishing Varnashram, because he had written about it, but how to do it. I can't remember what the third reason was. I know those first two. I'll find out the third reason. And he didn't get to Gitanagari. He got as far as England. He couldn't carry on. He had an operation. He had to go back. He went back and left in Vrindavan. So from that visit, everyone in ISKCON at the time knew that was Prabhupada's plan. And that was 1977. And so many years have passed, and there's still not a really good plan of how to. There are ideas of what it is and how to do it, and nobody agreed. I mean, there are groups of people that had ideas, and groups of people that agreed, and some others had a different idea, but none of it got practically implemented. The only place I know of that really dug in was in Hungary. And it wasn't just at the farm, but it was all the devotees in Hungary spent about a year having regular like brainstorm sessions on what is it and how to do it. And they came up with something very simple to start with, although they had drilled down on the what is it, then how to do it. So the how to do it part they came up with was from 7th Canto Bhagavatam, just after Narada Muni is relating the whole 7th Canto to Yudhishthira, starting from chapter 1. So and the story of Prahlad and Nrsingadev ends with chapter 10. So beginning in chapter 11, Yudhishthira says, wow, Prahlad was really an exalted person. I'm going to become the king. And as the king, it's my duty to train my citizens to become exalted, become elevated. So how to train citizens to become elevated like Prahlad? Good question. Not exactly his words, but that was the essence. And Narada says a number of things, but one of the things he says is pure devotional service. What help make one eligible for pure devotional service is following Varnashram. But even before following Varnashram, you have to become a human being. Then there's a whole long series of texts that say what is required to become a human being. So they took that seriously, and that list is how they structured their classes throughout the whole of Hungary. Every morning for a month, they spoke on this quality, and then the next, or every week or something like that, 2 weeks, some period of time, just every class is on this topic, every class is on that quality. So in order to become very tuned into the quality that makes one a human being. It's a nice approach. Become a human being before you can dedicate your duties to Vishnu, and by dedicating your duties to Vishnu, come to the stage of pure devotional service, because that's in that list of that verse also. I'm commenting because that's what this section is about. It's about Varnashram, and we hear it, and a thoughtful person is going to ask, how do you do that? And to without going into it, because it's several years worth of discussion where to some degree we have and to some degree we don't have. There's grahastas and there's brahmacharis and there's some sannyasis, and there's hardly any, like, what's a role model vanaprastha? It's like an extinct species or something, where it's not so well known what vanaprastha is, as much as it is reasonably well known what a brahmachari is, what a grahastha is, what a sannyasi is. But in any case, that's the ashrams. Then what to speak of varnas? It's not so clear. And to make it even a little more delicate, Some devotees have the view that varnashram is for people who aren't devotees. And some people have the view that devotees need to organize themselves by that social structure, varnashram. I'm just commenting. The topic doesn't have a lot of consensus on what it is and how to do it. There were periods in ISKCON's history where there was like a big wave. And because it didn't get a lot of traction, the wave kind of subsided and faded. And then there's it's in Prabhupada's book, so it's important. It's many times in his book, so it's important. Aside from, his purpose in visiting the West was to demonstrate it. And it was at a temple. It was at some people were saying, oh, varnashram is for farm communities. But it's not just for farm communities. Maybe a natural place for it to take root. Anyway, Ram Raja has that element and dedication of everything to Ram and a benevolent king. Then you can have Ram Raja. Text 52. Oh, Maharaj Parikshit, best of the Bharata dynasty. During the reign of Lord Ramacandra, the forests, the rivers, the hills, and the mountains, the states, the 7 islands, and the 7 seas were all favorable in supplying the necessities of life for all living beings. When Lord Ramachandra, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, was the king of this world, all bodily and mental suffering, disease, old age, bereavement, lamentation, distress, fear, and fatigue were completely absent. Let's hear that one again. I mean, old age, it had to have old age. All bodily and mental suffering, all bodily and mental without having bodily pain. How do you have a body without having bodily pain? I'm doubting. How is it possible? Maybe, less. Disease, old age, bereavement, lamentation, distress, fear, and fatigue were completely absent. There was even no death for those who did not want it. That's in a verse, not in the purport. Shui. Purport. All these facilities existed because of Lord Ramachandra's presence as the king of the entire world. A similar situation could be introduced immediately, even in this age of Kali, the worst of all ages. It is said, Kali Kale Nama Rupe, Krishna Avatar. Krishna descends in this Kali Yuga in the form of the holy name. Hare Krishna, Hare Rama. If we chant defenselessly, Rama and Krishna are still present in this age. The kingdom of Rama was immensely popular and beneficial. And the spreading of this Hare Krishna movement can immediately introduce a similar situation even in this Kali Yuga. I mean, it certainly was moving in that direction in Prabhupada's presence. He was very powerful. Extraordinarily powerful. Benevolent, not powerful in the common sense we think of powerful, but spiritually powerful. Transforming lives of people so quickly from a dark condition to elevated condition. Amazing. He was empowered. And he spoke very simply about that empowerment, that he wasn't doing something wonderful. He was just repeating Krishna's message, which is true. And he had great faith in the holy name. In hearing his lectures, I'm listening to a series of lectures where he's making that college tour, the 1972 college tour. I was part of that 1972 college tour. And he was speaking, the volume of his voice and the tone of his voice was intense. And at the same time, it was very appealing, like just try it. And the process is so simple. And so many times during those college lectures, Columbus, Ohio, and Buffalo, and in Boston, it was, please try it. It's so simple. And all knowledge can come, et cetera, et cetera. The emphasis was the holy name and the simplicity of the process. He had such faith. And with that faith, it was compelling. And people followed. People did experiment, and people did become convinced to give their lives, not just give some wealth or use some talent, but give their lives. In the Naperville community, because I spent time in Chicago. So Naperville is a suburb of Chicago. And this coming week, they're installing a Prabhupada Murti, and it's a big deal because the plan was to open this temple, phase 1 of the temple, in August. And because of the supply chain and the war and everything, it's made it not possible to get the supplies they need to open on time. So they decided that it's going to start with installing Prabhupada. And there's a really nice story connected with the devotee that made this murti. He made it special for the temple. His name is Lochan. He's now 80 years old, but his whole life has been dedicated to Srila Prabhupada's service as an artist. And his own probably could have been a very, very wealthy man, with Disneyland or whatever or wherever. But he was part of the Fate exhibit, first American theistic exhibit called Fate. Prabhupada sent him devotees. It's like wonderful. He sent devotees to parts of India where they knew how to make dolls from straw. And then from the straw, they would make a mold. And from the mold, they would make a casting, and they would make dolls. So they learned the art. And then they did it, for Krishna's pastimes. And the two places that they were established was in Los Angeles and in Detroit. And Lochan was one of those pioneers. And he was responsible for making something like 800 Prabhupada Murtis, some big number like that. With lots of love and care and detail. And he made, because he felt he got cancer, and the Naperville community reached out. He lives in North Carolina, but they reached out and took care of his medical bills. he's well enough to make that Prabhupada Murti. There's a very strong relationship. I'm just sharing this because speaking of how powerful Prabhupada was, he was able to engage devotees like that and have them give their lives. Like that. And some persons were a little slower than like that, but some persons was like that. And my thought process is going to telling you some Prabhupada stories like this. I'll tell one. Here in Houston, it's become something that seemed to be expected of me, that periodically, annually, or whenever we can, we have japa retreats. And that's, it's kind of had some expectation, like when's the next japa retreat? So we're talking about dates for the next japa retreat. So one time I was in a japa retreat with Badahari Prabhu. And his wife, Kosharupa, was there also. It was a remote place without the details. And we were sitting having lunch, and she started speaking. He was just taking prasadam. Do you want to hear the history of how my husband became a devotee? And I didn't get a chance to say yes or no. She was telling me the story. And he went to a very prestigious music school. And when he graduated, by the time he graduated from his music school, he was part of a band, or, at that time it was very popular, common. Young people would get together and have bands, and they had a whole tour, and they traveled for some number of months, something like 4 or 5 months, all through US and Europe. And when he came back, he landed in the Los Angeles airport. We landed in Los Angeles airport. It was a Saturday. Somebody gave him a book. The next day was Sunday. He went to the temple and attended the Sunday program. And the next day he was living in the temple. And he's been given his life to Prabhupada's service since then as a musician, using his talent, as Lochan was using his talent as an artist. He wasn't exactly a sculptor, but he was an artist, and Prabhupada engaged people according to their skills. You know, 24 hours, life fully dedicated. And it wasn't by meeting Prabhupada, it was by the books and the of course, the mood of the time. But he was on a career path heading for, stardom. Boom. It's pretty amazing. One sense, Krishna sent those persons to help Prabhupada. In another sense, Prabhupada was just so powerful that he attracted, like a magnet attracts iron filings. Prabhupada attracted sincere souls and engaged people in Krishna's service. It's easy to go off talking about Prabhupada, but there's Ram Raja by a great king who treated his subject like his own children, and treating like his own children would sometimes mean scolding, sometimes would mean praising, sometimes would mean so many things, whatever was needed to take care of so many children, and so many, and then train others to take care of those, and so on. Very powerful personality. People will ask, thoughtful people ask, How will this go on? Because during Prabhupada's presence, there was Prabhupada, and it just went kaboom, the Hare Krishna explosion. One reporter once asked Prabhupada, Swamiji, your movement is growing so fast. Maybe one day you'll be asked to be the leader of the country. And Prabhupada laughed and said, I'm not interested. That I can advise the leader of the country, but I don't want to be the leader of the country. He knew his place. But the movement was growing so exponentially. Not that there weren't bumps in the road and difficulties and conflicts and things, but by his power, things became regularized. And then his departure was very difficult for everyone. And so things have been going on. And in Prabhupada's absence, those that have served him are carrying things forward, not in the same dynamic as when he was present, but carrying things forward. And then what happens the next generation? Look around the room. So one of the main obvious factors is person should be encouraged to read Prabhupada's books. Not to become bookworms or gyanis, but to have that connection with our founder Acharya. And the message that he wanted to give to the world that's in his books. There's other medium, but it's primarily through his books. To preserve ISKCON, the current generation devotees must be very strongly encouraged to read Prabhupada's books. It's not a guarantee, other than if we don't, then there's a guarantee. Thing will become that the institution and that which was driving the institution will dissipate. Guaranteed. That's what will happen for sure. So to keep Prabhupada in the center and the vitality of what he wanted to give the world and what he gave the world enshrined within his books, it's essential. The degree of emphasis today, let's say even the structures of Bhakti Shastri, it wasn't there so much during Prabhupada's time. I'm just sharing this with you for those of you that weren't around during Prabhupada's time. There wasn't there. The Bhakti Shastri exam was a one-pager. It was really simple. Prabhupada gave the outline and said persons that want second initiation, they have to pass this exam. It wasn't followed by many. I received second initiation directly from Prabhupada, and I didn't do that little exam. But it was a directional understanding. And now there's a structure to it. And there's a purpose for that structure. It's not to create scholarly devotees. It's to create devotees that have grounding in who is Prabhupada and the ABCs, or the Sambandha Abhideya Prayojana teachings of the Bhagavatam, and are the acharyas representing disciplic succession, like Rupa Goswami. And then there's further studies and further studies. So that we're proficient and we can uphold the teachings of our founder Acharya because we know what they are. And then comes the application. I spent some time with somebody And somebody was sharing that they know some younger persons that know the philosophy because they've heard it since they're young, but they they're not they didn't learn how to apply it. I think I'll say it a little differently. There's a devotee couple that after they got married, they became the Sunday school teachers of a particular temple. I won't even say where. And they noticed that the prior Sunday school teachers had teaching the following manner. Okay, kids, today we're going to learn verses from Bhagavad Gita because Gita Jayanti is coming up and we want to have everybody stand up in front of all the parents and recite their slokas. So we're going to learn Bhagavad Gita slokas. Okay, kids, Bhagavad Gita slokas time. And then it was, okay, we're going to have a drama about Krishna Janmashtami. And so it was all scripted by the teachers. And what happened was when the kids grew up, they knew the slokas. They didn't know the meaning. They knew the words of their script, but they didn't know the meaning. It was not something that they were carrying inside. And in their adult life, they kind of faded away from Krishna consciousness. Then this other couple took responsibility and they decided to use a different approach. And the different approach was, okay, kids, what do you want to do today? Or what do you want to do this month or this season? And then they would, the kids weren't used to that. Because most teachers don't ask you, what do you want to do? They ask, tell you what you're going to do. So because they were involved, and then it stuck. And those youth are now ones that are teaching and leading and singing and teaching, but the other younger students, they're now the Sunday school teachers for the younger kids. And, as leaders of the younger kids. Or you get the idea. And then there's teachers that teach application, because that's connected to the Varnashram system topic. How do you do it? How do you apply this? When the instructor, or when you're with your families or with your community, etc., if you can go that extra step and help the adults understand by practice again and again to apply the teachings that they hear, not just learn the teachings and get an A in their exam, or whatever it is, the numerical number that's required in order to get your Bhakti Shastri class certificate. If there's emphasis on application, it helps not just to have it to be an intellectual exercise, but a devotional experience. The application part is so essential. Now, if you get an opportunity to be a teacher, or you get an opportunity to study under a teacher that emphasizes application, you're very fortunate. You're in good shape. I don't know how much that's emphasized in public school. You're teaching at a public school, right? Is application emphasized? Not at all. It's academic. And people get rewarded for being academically capable, but their character may not be so good. And the principle of spiritual life is primarily character, not acumen to be able to say back something. to be able to say back something that's good. But it's not the essence of character development. And the essence of character development is a little more difficult to achieve. Those of you that are parents, you know, to teach, say please and thank you, that's one thing. That's a behavior. And to teach gratitude, that's another thing. Right? Those of you that are parents. How do you teach gratitude? How do you develop character beyond a behavior? So that when you're not around, the behavior is there because the character is there. So you're training your dependents so that in their adult life, they're moving around the world with good character. That's a parent's responsibility. That's parenting, a big and responsibility of spiritual educators also within our community. I've kind of gotten off on a tangent. I'm going to say one more thing because I'm on the tangent. One of the very scholarly devotees in ISKCON that I've come to know is a devotee named Hari Parshad. Some of you know Hari Parshad by name? No, you don't know him. He's a Sanskritist, and he's kind of like he likes poetry. He likes things that are expressed in poetic manner. So he gives very elevated classes on all kinds of things. You know, the Nava Prameyas of Madhvacharya, and he sounds like as if he's a Madhva follower. Or anyway, many, many, many wonderful topics, many wonderful topics. He's kind of a celebrity, a YouTube celebrity based in Madhya Pradesh. And I didn't know it, but he's just visited in Portland, spent, a week or at least a weekend, probably a week. And he stayed at a family that I know that then, and the temple president who I know, they're both disciples. And he was astonished at their character. And he was like, he just sent me a message. We don't communicate a lot. When I have philosophical or technical questions, sometimes I ask. I don't try to bother him too much because he's like really busy. So he just sent this nice message saying, your disciples they're so nicely trained, and I was cared for so nicely, and the whole experience was, I one of the best of my travels because of their graciousness and their qualities and their character. And it was like the really nice compliment. And I said, I feel blessed because they also train people. They attract people like that, and they train people very meticulously like that. So if you have someone that's willing to train you carefully, and you're in your own homes with your families, where the focus is application and development of character, not just learning the teachings. I mean, because we have busy lives and it's hard to do everything. But when character is there, it makes it easier. And without character being there, it makes it harder. Makes it really hard. And then comes a community. And if people don't have good character in the community, then you spend a lot of time putting out fires because people do things that spring out of whatever, the absence of good character. So the purpose of our reading the Bhagavatam together, or reading Ramayana together, or honoring Lord Ramachandra's appearance day next weekend, it's character development and bringing up this sense of doing whatever it is that we do, the direct activities and the indirect activities, connected to the pleasure of the Supreme Lord. I'll direct you to a really nice verse that says a lot. Brahma Samhita text 61. Brahma Samhita text 61 comes right after Brahma's prayers. You know, the Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami, all those wonderful prayers. And then Krishna speaks directly to Brahma. Brahma doesn't ask a question, but intuitively Krishna knows his question. The question is, now I've had this really high realization, and now I'm supposed to build the universe. And if I build the universe, I'm going to get really distracted with all the details of building a universe. And so I'm feeling hesitant because it's going to distract me from this high realization. But then if I don't build the universe, that's my duty, then I'll be guilty of non-performance of duty, which is another problem. So I've got a problem if I do it, I got a problem if I don't. So what do? You follow? And we don't have to build the universe. We have some other duties, whatever they are, according to our nature, according to our capacity, we have some duties. Kids go to school and moms do what moms do and dads do what dads do. And we all have some duties and it keeps us busy. So when you're busy, how are you going to maintain this experience? Higher consciousness pursuit experience. And then that text 61 gives an answer. It's two verses, two Sanskrit verses together. And it's describing the principle of connecting the material with the spiritual, and that then the material becomes spiritualized. It doesn't use that language, but that's what it's saying. Bhaktisiddhanta's terminology is dovetail. It's a nice word. And I learned about it from carpentry. Somebody's a carpenter, they explained. Maybe sometimes you've seen in cabinets, they have this system where pieces of wood fit together with other pieces of wood, and it makes it really strong. That's an example of carpentry, example of dovetail. And it can be stronger than just a single piece of wood. When you connect this piece with that piece, and it's called the dovetail system. And the dovetail system with our occupation or the social activities of life is you connect the social activities of life with the primary activities of bhakti. And then the social activities or the secondary activities, or it's called gona dharma, connected with mukhya dharma, or the principal activities, the 9 processes of bhakti, they become spiritualized. And then they're not impediments. But you have to connect the worldly things with the spiritual things. For Brahma, it's build the universe. And he doesn't lose his Krishna consciousness by building a universe. It's a very common question that, yeah, as a traveling sannyasi, I can tell you it's in the top 10 of the hit parade. How do I, and one person said it very simply, I get it from, up till 9 o'clock. And then after 5 o'clock, the morning sadhana, I get it. And when I come back from work, I get it. But it's the 9 to 5 I don't get. Like, how do I do it? Because I sit down at my workstation and the 5 o'clock bell rings and I realize the day passed. I wasn't thinking of Krishna. So so this is an important teaching. It's the application in our practical life. That's the message. That's this joining of the worldly requirements just by having a body and a mind that need engagement. And how do you connect those to Krishna consciousness, to the consciousness of Krishna? That you join those activities with the primary activities of bhakti. And it takes some effort and takes some guidance. And that's what teachers are for, to show by example and to explain by precept. And that's what communities are for, to help one another learn that art in our association with one another. There's just 2 more verses left in the chapter, and I'm going to end the chapter. We'll stop. Lord Ramacandra took a vow to accept only one wife and have no connection with any other women. He was a saintly king, and everything in his character was good, untinged by qualities like anger. He taught good behavior for everyone, especially for householders, in terms of the Varnashram Dharma. Thus, he taught the general public by his personal activities. And the purport is about Ekapatni Vrata, the vow to have only one wife. In those days, of course, people did marry more than one wife. Even Lord Ramachandra's father accepted more wives than one, but Lord Ramachandra, as an ideal king, accepted only one wife, Mother Sita. When Mother Sita was kidnapped by Ravana and the Rakshasas, Lord Ramachandra, as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, could have married hundreds and thousands of Sitas, but to teach us how faithful he was to his wife, he fought with Ravana and finally killed him. The Lord punished Ravana and rescued his wife to instruct men to have only one wife. Lord Ramachandra accepted only one wife and manifested sublime character, thus setting an example for householders. A householder should live according to the ideal of Lord Ramachandra, who showed how to be a perfect person. Being a householder or living with a wife and children is never condemned, provided one lives according to the regulative principles of Varnashram Dharma. Those who live in accordance with these principles, whether as householders, brahmacharis, or vanaprasthas, are all equally important. In the last verse of the chapter, Mother Sita was very submissive, faithful, and shy, and chaste, always understanding the attitude of her husband. Thus, by her character and her love and service, she completely attracted the mind of the Lord. Purport: as Lord Ramachandra is the ideal husband, Ekapatni Vrata, Mother Sita is the ideal wife. Such a combination makes family life very happy. Yadyarasharati Shreshtas Tatadveti Eve Tororjana. Whatever example a great man sets, common people follow. If the king, the leaders, and the brahmanas, the teachers, would set forth the examples we receive from Vedic literature, the entire world would be heaven. Indeed, there would no longer be hellish condition within this material world. So that's the end of chapter 10. And chapter 11 will start not tomorrow. Tomorrow is a special day. You got the text message? Yeah. Tomorrow, you're all invited, but it's a class dedicated to the Chinese devotees. And it's going to be a 2-hour class because it takes twice as long to say in English and have translated into Chinese. And it'll be on a screen. You can see the images, and it's got the English and the Chinese letters. And they'll be asking the questions. And if you have questions, you'll also be able to ask questions. It's chapter 66 of Canto 10, Pondraka, Imitation Lord of Vasudev, chapter 66, Canto 10. We'll continue this the following day. I think, yeah. Yeah, Thursday. Is there any discussion? Yes? Your sister.
Hey, Krishna Garaj, Thank you so much for the wonderful lecture. It was really, really striking. I think coming from a statistics and research point of view, Guru Maharaj, the school to prison pipeline is constantly and steadily increasing. Like it's really, really bad. Um, Kids are ending up in prison right from the ages of 6, 7, and they haven't even crossed elementary school. And it's really, really hurtful to see them going through so much just because of some a lack of character in a way. And I think public schools really don't emphasize character, like Sanchari was saying. And I don't think really something can be done at the public school level to introduce character, because I think we've mentioned previously that. Thank you.
I can hear better.
Yeah. So the value education really, teaching morals without a conception of the supreme, doesn't last too long. But I think in corporate secular worlds and areas, and I think in relation to me, in prisons, we cannot we cannot say God. We cannot introduce anything that has to do even like remotely with anything theistic. So I think at a stage where I am right now, I have some invitation to participate in helping kids in prison. So what would be a good start without having a theistic concept to just bring them one step closer to having character?
Well, this is a specialty, and I don't know if I'm qualified to speak about a specialty. I do know that there are, what's the word? Chaplains in prisons. And I don't know how popular they are, but I visited a prison once. I wasn't giving a class at a prison. I was visiting someone who was in a prison, and I was taken, it's a high security prison, blah, 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 blah. And the chaplain's office was right there in the prison. And I was taken to the chaplain's office where I met with this, individual. And he described a little bit what it's like, but he didn't look not busy. I don't know how I don't know the detail. So to respond to your question, it would really take knowing what the field is like, and I don't know if you could pick a more difficult field to work in than that one, because people are broken inside, and how you can have them become theistic when they're broken inside. I don't have the answer for that, because at best it's behavior modification and not so much transformation. I would think a good person for you to consult, because she's a chaplain, is Rambaru. For those of you who don't know who she is, she was married. She was a mother, and she was married to both a GBC and guru for some years. And she then, circumstances required that she go a different direction. And so she entered into chaplaincy. And one of the first, her story that I heard her say is that the chaplain asked in a kind of a questionnaire, what would be the most fearful thing for you to do? And she happened to, enter to see people that nearly died being burned. So she was sent to a place where people had nearly died being burned. Her sensibilities were challenged. That was the first assignment. So she would be a good person for you to reach out to. And I don't know There's somebody else I know that's a chaplain that is a Harvard, um, what's it called? Harvard graduate in the School of Theology or something like that. She might be a good one. But, going to, because the chaplaincy has a certain professional attitude and aptitude. And, when you're a chaplain, you're dealing with people that are in one way or another broken with something. Commonly, there's university chaplains and they don't have people that are broken or, that as the primary, audience. But there's something that goes with the profession of chaplaincy that I think you would, should learn about it before you go marching too far into something that's just like within our devotee communities. It's a very simple principle. If somebody's listened to Satchidananda Swami's classes, and he's studied this a lot, when people are there's a lack of alignment in their needs, then it's very hard for them to accept devotional practice. And when people are broken in this level and that level and the other level to the point where they become criminal, then how are they going to get it when it comes to devotional life? So what's the facility in a prison for helping people that are broken? Another person that has a profession similar to that, it's not the same, but it's Premarnava. Premarnava, New Jersey. He is a teacher, and the school that he's the teacher at is a reform school. It's kids that have been in prison and now they're kind of like getting out of prison, but there's an education for kids that were in prison. And I don't know, you can ask him what that's like. Is he able to, are there boundaries where he can do something? It probably there's not too many, flexibility from the administration level for teachers to do anything that's, in the God-centered way. Because, you got to keep God out of the schools and all that secularism, the stuff. If you're inspired, you may find a method. I'm a little skeptical. The structures being what they are permits it. I know of one devotee, Murari Chaitanya, was a special ed teacher, and he found out that a lot of the difficulties with children that have education problems, that's what special ed means, it has to do with something broken in the family. And that's what he did. He went to families and helped understand what was broken in the family to help the special education student be able to become educated. But if you can't do that, how are you going to go anywhere with it? Just behavior modification, and it's about it. And then they're out, and then they, the bad association, they do it again because the impression is there and it hasn't really. I don't have an answer to your question.
Yeah, Raj, I think it was just a little too specific. So I think the question should have been phrased something like, in general, would moralistic education bring someone a little closer to developing actual character, or is it just a zero?
Well, a little closer, yeah. And then the atmosphere in which they grew up and the atmosphere that's available is going to go back down again. It's just like, drug addiction. And then they go out and associate in the world, and the drug addiction people find drug addicted people. And then again become, drug addicted.
I was just wondering because we do stuff like, after they're out of prison, we're like, we don't just let them go. We sort of like help them find jobs and everything. So I was wondering, is there a way that we could have some education about characters specifically that would actually keep them a little bit more stable when they leave? Or is that a zero again?
It seems utopian
It does. Yeah, it does.
because modes of nature have a tendency to repeat themselves.
Yeah.
And even if somebody's wet and you dry them off and you put them on dry land, they're going to go back to, because tendency is strong. It's like Prabhupada's example of taking a worm in stool, and you feel all compassion. Let me take the worm out of stool, and you put him by the side of the pile of stool, and it'll just wiggle back into the pile of stool because that's nice. That's happiness. That's happiness. So how do you give someone a higher taste? And if you have boundaries of what you can't, when you can and cannot do, mostly what you cannot do, even if you wanted to, you can't do. What to speak of when they're again in the free atmosphere, is they're going to gravitate towards those lower modes and that bad association, and the same thing again. The holistic picture is needed in order to bring transformation. Anyone else?
Hare Krishna. So building on that question, she stole half of my question, first of all. But the point is, if I look through my life, through my grandparents, to parents, to myself, I could see the contentness in my grandparents, whatever was their content, my parents, then myself, I look how it is going. And even if you look at the situation today, as she just said, the products coming out of schools now is not as content as humanity was.
Yes.
And if you look at the leaders even today,
Oof.
they are also, if you talk about two types of leaders, one is corporate, take that out, but others who are really respected, they always have a spiritual content in their life. So the results are in front of us. And taking this atheistic or secular so-called thing in the schools has not changed the dimension where people are still identifying themselves with the religion.
It's
than
not identifying themselves
with the religion. As you see, many people are still identifying deeply with them, the religion, even though the religious education is not in the schools. So when the humanity results are in front of us, what will it take? I'm just thinking out loud here, for this whole education system to understand that we are making more education, but not the character, when the results are in front of us. So why is that people are not understanding that picture?
well, the mode of ignorance and the trend of Kali Yuga. The trend of Kali Yuga is to increase this and displace that. And the trend keeps going. As the modes get darker, Kali Yuga progresses. And Kali Yuga is progressing, the modes are getting darker, so people can't see that the situation is becoming more and more degraded. And then the qualities of which, under which they're becoming degraded, is identified in scripture, but they can't see it. Now, a big asset to see it is light. And at light in the sense of a person of exemplary character that speaks truth and walks their talk. That's needed for the light to go on, for people to see, what they're not seeing. Why they can't see it is conditioning in the modes of lower modes of nature. Maya. you can't see. What is not is what is, and what is and what is not. And it gets, it gets accelerated and thickened.
Anything
What to do?
to this whole education system, how to wake up the education system?
Well, we look to our acharyas for the answer. And what you're seeing is just a smidgen of what our acharyas saw and see. And, the solution, the remedy, the medicine is sound vibration and good example. Propagate elevating sound vibration and model it. Because sound is very powerful and good example is even more powerful, or the right combination. Propagating God consciousness by example and by sound. That's what our acharyas have done in this age of Kali. That's the remedy. It's a big challenge, for sure, because the machinery that's in place is very strong. And they control the gears and levers and the purse strings.
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj.
Hare Krishna.
I have a question today and a comment.
Okay.
My question is, why did Dashrath Maharaj have 3 wives?
Why?
Why did Dashrath Maharaj have 3 wives?
He had more than 3 wives. But I can tell you why he had more than 3 wives, but I can tell you why he had 3 wives.
That'd be pleasant to know why he had more than 3 wives.
More than one. More than one. Why 3 instead of 1? That's your question? It was allowed. It was common. And kings had the capacity to have, to maintain properly, and Dasrath had that capacity. And so he accepted, it was common practice, accepting more than one, a king accepting more than one wife. Oh, that's my phone. Hello. Somebody calling from India. Okay, we'll do this. What time is it in India right now? 7 in the morning? Sure. Okay. Well, he was a qualified leader and they were qualified queens. And it was a good combination. And so he accepted more than one wife. It was common practice. Another, and not the only reason, but one of the additional reasons was having sons was important for a king, because having a son meant the preservation of the lineage of the king, but also, the protection of the kingdom by the king and his sons. They were directly assisting him in a very loyal way to assist him in ruling the kingdom. So good sons was an important function for a king. Okay, and your comment?
My comment is, you said that when in Sunday school, our teachers say that we have to do the shaloka, memorize it, but we don't understand it. And I can relate to that because in school, some of my classes, our teachers make us write some notes And they don't let us they don't tell us why this happens or how this happens. They just tell us to write it down and memorize it. And when the test comes, the words are mixed up and we don't understand. So some of us fail or others just get a low grade.
Yeah, you get rewarded for being a machine and not being, having good character, or what to speak of understanding things. I mean, it's easy to throw mud at the education system. It has purposes that it serves, but it's deficient. But it's just part of the system, and the good educators go beyond what the system gives. That's what makes them good educators. Okay, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Oh, can you hear me? Okay. Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. You were mentioning about how Ramacandra did not have any anger, right? It was one of his admirable qualities.
He had transcendental anger.
Okay. Because I was like, is it wrong to get angry at like certain things?
Well, if transcendental anger means that which is in service to Krishna or service to Ramachandra. So if it's in service to, then it has its place. But if it's just getting angry because you're feeling frustrated because you wanted and something should be done properly and wasn't done properly, and then that's material. It's not like wrong, but it stays on the material platform.
So
there are gateways to hell, and that's one of them. So we don't want to go there. That's a bad place. But it has a place. Transcendental anger. The classic transcendental anger is Hanuman. And for service to Ram, he exhibited anger. He burned Lanka. And it was for a purpose. It wasn't just like he was a pyromaniac. He wanted to go burn everything. He wanted to teach them, you should give Sita back. And you don't give Sita back, and you're in big trouble. So there's a purpose.
would you say that anger is shown in actions and not like physically emotion? Like it would not physically show in the face, but be shown through the actions. Like for example,
Are you saying if you don't hit anybody, but you just yell at people, then it's okay?
not exactly.
That's not what you're saying. But exhibiting anger usually comes with an action. You get red in the face, and people will feel uncomfortable because your fist clenched, and you're showing anger in your face, and you're like red as a beet, but you don't hit them yet. But that's coming generally.
Thank you.
You're on a roll this evening. Go ahead.
I thought of another question in my mind.
Okay.
What if a king has a daughter and not a son?
It happens. It happens. So what happens when that happens? I'm not so terribly knowledgeable about this, but my understanding is if there is no son, then when the daughter marries, she becomes the queen and the king becomes something, but she's the queen. So he takes the title of king, but she's in the royal family.
I have another thing. Even if there is a princess that marries a prince, a princess marries a prince. If that princess goes to the prince's kingdom, who will uphold the kingdom when the king dies?
I don't understand your question. So there's a king and he marries a princess, and the princess comes to live with the king. Yes?
No.
No.
What I'm trying to say, when a king has a daughter,
The king has a daughter, okay.
after that, another king has a son.
And some other over there, another kingdom. That kingdom has a son, right? Okay. So the princess that marries the prince, she goes to where the prince is. And she becomes the queen when he becomes the king. So what happens over the king, like the first king that just had the daughter?
Yes.
He's got a problem. Got to have a son. There's rules. I mean, yeah, it's I don't know those rules. I don't know those rules. There's rules. What happens when this happens? What happens when that happens? There's rules. I don't know the rules. He's better have a son. Because he could have both his daughter and a son. Or have a bunch of sons and one daughter. So there's rules. I don't know the rules. Anyone in the back? Okay, we're done.
If there is a time, I have one question.
Okay, there's time.
In my observation, I've seen people, and this relates to your discussion and the questions that came earlier, that those people who live close to nature or who are part of nature, Mother Nature, they are more likely to be people of high character and also close to God. Is that a correct understanding?
What's your observation?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so it's your observation.
It- it-
It's correct that it's your observation. They're the persons that don't live close to nature, and they're very elevated in character.
That's true. That's true. The majority, or the mostly speaking.
It has everything to do. I mean, if you want, I think you're taking it too far. Because I don't know anything in scripture that says what you said. And if it's an observation, then it's your observation. But there are persons that live close to nature, and they're thieves in forests. They're bad people in forests, although they're close to nature. So, I don't know if it's okay to make such a generalization. It has much more to do with the training that one has. But persons who are trained nicely, they have some happiness being in nature. That's also, an observation. They're happy being where they are. They're happy being in nature. So a lot has to do with association and training rather than where you live.
I wasn't, that's not, training is of course there. The nature is not at the cost of training, but the training is part of the nature, provides that assistance and support. That's what I meant.
Well,
So
look, I think you have good character and you don't live in the country. You gonna argue with me?
generally speaking,
Okay,
speaking.
I don't know if it's fair to say,
Yeah.
generally speaking. There's a question in the back.
Hare Krishna Swamiji.
Hare Krishna.
I mean, just what he just suggested, I think it's about being grateful to the nature. And if you're
Yes.
grateful to the
Yes,
nature,
yes,
we know who created the
Yes.
nature, and
exactly.
kind of making a connection there.
Yes, yes.
But coming back to the previous questions, one thing, if you would suggest, I mean, bringing the kids to the spiritual discourses or giving them some spiritual education, keeping them close to, where we are from or where we need to be in our moral values or spiritual values.
to keep to grow their character and make it stronger. But just one thing, if you can suggest, more than, learning the scriptures or more than learning the shlokas, just one thing which you think most of us are missing. Well, that is there, but we don't have control over that. I wish it was, because I can understand from the school's perspective, because they got this huge list of curriculum they want to cover, and the teachers are there just for the job. They just want to cover that syllabus. They're not worried about if kid is, taking it in, or they just want to cover that syllabus. I don't want to comment on that, but from parent perspective, from a community perspective, what should we do?
It's a good question. And my thoughts are going to a few, not just one thing. So I'm challenged to come up with the one thing.
More the merrier, right?
Well, the most important thing, as far as my understanding goes, is example, achar. More than if you as a parent, or me as a teacher, or any one of us as a community member, if we're modeling that which the scripture teaches, and we're aligning our lives according to that very sincerely, and we're staying on that course, that's the most important thing that we can do for our children or our students or our community members, is to be good examples of what we, not just what our values are, because this is a whole topic, but that those values connect with pleasing Krishna. Because if you don't have values that connect with that, the values start moving. And then they move, and then they move, and then they move, even within our lifetime, what to speak of over generations. So that those the things that we understand from scripture, and that we're trying to live our lives according, for the pleasure of Krishna, for the pleasure of the Supreme Being. That bhakti principle is, when it's vital in our lives, it's the most powerful thing, beneficial thing we can do. And because then the details flow from that, from what's inside comes outside.
Thank you.
Okay, we're gonna end. We're gonna end. Because late. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.